So we're going to kick off. So hi everyone, and welcome to this property webinar hosted by Rainmaker Marketing. And my name is Stefan Botha. I know there are two Stefan Bothas on the screen here. The one, Neil Peter says, is an imposter, so don't pay attention to that. But I know we're now entering day 33 of lockdown, so I really hope that everyone is safe and healthy and staying as sane as they possibly can during this very abnormal period. So we've had a huge number of registrations for today's webinar, so we're really thankful for everyone who has joined us. And our real objective today is to keep it super simple. And our one mission is to give you information which you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. And we are obviously honored with the panel we have today of experts from around the country who cover such a broad level of topics. And we also just really want to encourage you to post any questions you have. Those of you who don't know, but at the bottom there is a chat function, you can post questions. I've got specific questions that I really want to ask these guys and get as much out of them as we possibly can. But we'll try and allocate some time towards the end of the session to go through your comments and feel free to ask anything you want. I think the key is that we want to allocate questions for people who are either first-time buyers trying to enter a market, who are investors interested in things like rental yields, etc., as well as developers. I know we've got a lot of developers on this panel today, and I think there are a lot of questions specific to different industry experts that they may want to ask, or just other people who've got specific information they want to know all about the property industry as a whole. And I think just from a business perspective, we are unbelievably passionate, obviously, about property, but also unbelievably passionate about strategically located developments at any price points that are configured around market demand. And we really believe that with the current social and economic conditions, that the very unique products at whatever price point will become more and more sought after in future. But today we are really focusing on one segment, and that is the entry-level estate segment. It's an area that we're really passionate about. It's an area that we believe is going to be a very fast-growing one, but also one that we feel people don't necessarily have enough information on. And that's exactly the reason why we put this panel together today, so we can really give you guys insights. I know even just in the discussions prior to this webinar starting, between the panel, some really interesting stuff that came out that people won't necessarily know. So I'm going to give you a quick little introduction on the panel. These are guys from around the country and really leaders in their field. And in no particular order, if I can just introduce Graham Castano. Graham, how's it? Graham's a senior development asset manager for International Housing Solutions, who are obviously massive players in the entry-level estate market. I know Graham said his internet isn't the fastest, so if you do lose him at various points, we'd obviously just take that into consideration. And Georgina Smith, who's the head of sector development and market transformation for the Green Building Council of South Africa. Then Rainmaker, who's the CEO of Rainmaker Property. And they really are massive drivers in this whole inner city rejuvenation revolution. And we'll hear a bit more about that in a sec. Then Neil Peterson, who's the owner and editor of Real Estate Investor magazine. Welcome, Neil. And then Chris Horn, who's the director of Avoca Developments. So welcome everyone, and thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to jump straight into questions. And the first one, Graham, comes to you. And I think it's more a question that a lot of people on this panel probably, or a lot of people on the webinar want to know. When we talk entry-level estates, what type of developments are we referring to? And do these developments include the normal aspirational elements that you would associate with in development, like security and facilities, etc.?
Hello, everybody. Graham here. So just to give you a quick rundown of what we do, we're actually a business called International Housing Solutions, and we're a private equity affordable residential investment business. So what we actually do is target affordable purchases in everything we do. So we have what you call a ceiling price in the developments we do, currently standing at around about, call it 900,000 per unit. So that gives you a good understanding that we would typically try to go up to that ceiling price only for any product that we invest in. So the type of products that we invest in, we look at affordable estates, be they sectional title, Res 3 developments, or be they freestanding houses that are also in the affordable sector. So typically we'd look at for economies of scale, we'd look at a unit minimum size of about 150 units per development. You could say that on a unit size, we look anything from 40 to call it 70 square meters. So that's price driven. So we've got units in developments where we sell from as low as 500,000 per unit, which is a 2-bed, 1-bath, to as high as call it R1 million. So to break it down, for example, we've got a development here in Johannesburg called Terong. That's a 634 unit development, all freestanding units in the Cosmo City area, where the smallest unit, which is about 45 square meters, is selling for 500,000. The largest unit, which is about, call it 75 square meters, is selling for 800,000. And you have the ability to add on to these units because they're freestanding houses and such is the design. Then we can go to Cape Town, where we have in Parklands a unit mix of between, call it 45 to 65 square meters, also selling between 600 and 900,000. And then with Avoca in Balito, we've got unit mixes again. There's a 300 unit development where we're selling units between 700 and 900,000. So that's just gives you the scale of the developments. On what we have in all our developments is they're all secure with electric fences around. It's all biometric entry and exit. There's clubhouses and amenities for children to play. And most of all our developments are green and are age certified. So what you get, and we now have the data that confirms that we save 20% in the embodied energy of the building. We save 20% for electricity to the end user, and we save 20% in water consumption for the end user. So our developments compete with any of the other developers that are in this segment, but we would actually say we're better because all our developments are age certified.
Okay. And then Graham, yeah, I think that sums it up really well. I think one of the things I find really interesting is that between 2016 and 2019, the average year-on-year price increases within the affordable market in South Africa was 11%. I think anyone understands property and realizes that an 11% appreciation per year average over 3 years is quite significant. It means that you're effectively doubling the value of your property over the space of 10 years and almost 3 times what inflation is. So Graham, I think the big question is what's driving that? And is that sustainable, especially in light of what's going on around us at the moment?
Look, pre-COVID, we could say, yes, it was sustainable, but just given the fact that there's such a backlog in affordable housing, from not only from an end user point of view, but also from an investor side. So typically, and I think Rainmaker also does the work, where you get at least probably 70% of your purchases in a development are first-time home buyers that are coming in to actually live in the estate. So these developments cater to the aspirational part of purchases, one. And two, there's a stepping stone, like a first port of call before somebody goes into their larger residential development. I mean, the market has gone to great lengths and in teaching people that, you know, your first property is something that is an investment. You're going to have capital appreciation. You can start there with your first family, at least your initial setup as a family. Once you start growing as a family, you can now look for your second property, take some of the gains you've made from your first property and buy your second property. Either keep it or sell it, but it actually gives that stepping stone. So as long as there's a backlog and there's capital appreciation, this should carry on.
Okay, perfect. So Georgina, I'm going to move on to you. Obviously, the environmentally conscious living, as we call it, is obviously the buzz right now. I think the biggest challenge for many developers is they don't necessarily know how to make it happen. And secondly, they don't necessarily know how to make it viable for the end user who's buying into developments. So I think the question for you is, what is EDGE and how does it encourage green living?
Great. Thanks, Stefan. Hi, everyone. Yes, so green living, and particularly within the residential space, is on the rise in South Africa. As Graham has mentioned, IHS have demonstrated great leadership with getting all of their developments EDGE certified. So for those of you who are new to this, EDGE is a type of green building rating system. It stands for Excellence in Design Efficiency. Developers can opt to voluntarily use it on their projects, so it's not a mandatory requirement. It was developed by the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, and the GBCSA, the Green Building Council of South Africa, have partnered with the IFC to be the local independent certifier. So what does that mean? EDGE essentially sets out measures in energy, water, and the embodied carbon of the construction materials that you use for your development, that the project team can then either choose to pursue or not to pursue, but ultimately you've got to aim for a 20% improvement against a nationally developed baseline. So for example, if you look at the kind of energy category, an EDGE certified project would then, in theory, be designed to operate at 20% better than minimum national building regulations. So that's just to give you a feel for what it is. It's a very user-friendly rating system. So, you know, they're globally and in South Africa, there are many types of green building rating systems. And you can go and have a look online, either on the edgebuildings.com website, or you can have a look at the GBCSA website, and I can send the links through to go and try the app out for yourself and go and play around with it. It's really fun to kind of think about the different things you could implement on a development or in your home. There are a lot of benefits, and you know, they can accrue either to the developer or to somebody who's buying into an EDGE development, or if you're renting it out. I think first and foremost, being EDGE certified means that you have a quantitative proof that your building or your development has reduced its environmental impact. So this is not somebody just saying, oh, it's green. It's actually being quantified, and the impacts are actually tangible, and they're significant enough. You're not talking about your scale is big enough to justify a rating. I think that, you know, the second benefit mainly speaks to costs, because we're dealing with quite a tough economic climate and environment. And so there are operating costs in terms of reduced electricity bills, reduced water bills, that would then, you know, put more money in the pocket of the homeowner at the end of the month. And we've got some good examples and case studies on the websites that demonstrate that. I think from an investor's perspective, investors are looking at how they can, you know, future-proof their portfolios and their different asset classes. So, you know, that's a key issue in terms of looking at the cost of capital. For those of you who might not be aware of it, you know, we've had a big EDGE certification from Baldwin coming through last year, where over 16,000 units are going to be EDGE certified. And Baldwin partnered with ABSA to develop a eco home loan that would then obviously provide preferential lending rates to people who bought into those developments. So I think that, you know, there are many, many benefits, both for developers and for the end users, in terms of going for a green building certification such as EDGE. Thank you.
No, thanks. That's brilliant. And I think just to throw another question back at you, I think obviously without having a crystal ball, I think what impact do you think COVID-19 will have in terms of how green trends will emerge in future, or changes that may occur?
Well, thanks, John. No, that's a great question. I think we've seen, you know, a lot of thinking about that in the last few weeks, and I'm sure that you've all kind of read different articles. I think there's a term that's kind of been used, and it's, you know, build it back better. And it's really raised awareness about how we are living our lives, how we are choosing to live within the confines of the planet. And I think it's going to inform design thinking, you know, developers, architects, professionals, to basically say, how are we going to build spaces that are really going to be healthy going forward? And that obviously speaks to, you know, good either ventilation rates or, you know, good HVAC systems that really speaks to healthy buildings, and that's at the core of most green building design considerations and good design principles. So I definitely think it is going to have an impact, most importantly because it's going to make people rethink the spaces that we want to build that are going to last with us for the next 100 years.
Perfect, thanks. Just quickly, I know there's a question that came through from Sandy Powell, who just asked, what is the meaning of GBSA? So just to clarify, Sandy, it means Green Building Council of South Africa. And basically, they would be the regulatory body that implements things like EDGE. And obviously, Jordina runs the development side of that. So Chris Horn, I'm going to jump onto you quickly, or jump to you. So I think we all know the big... yeah, I'll take that back. I think we all know the biggest barrier to entry for any property investment is those out-of-pocket costs you have up front. I think we always say the biggest challenge as the market tightens is people having the ability to pay a 10% deposit to get into development. And then obviously the other costs, legal costs, transfer fees, levies, levy stabilization. If you could just maybe touch on how the affordable space has really led the way in terms of bringing down those barrier to entries.
In terms of costs in the affordable space, you need to differentiate between two forms of costs. There's upfront cost, and there's operational cost. Units are generally sold off plan. So a deposit in an affordable space is usually as low as 5 or 10,000 Rand as opposed to 10 or 20%. So let's use R1 million purchase of a residential unit in an affordable space. That would equate to 100,000 Rand deposit in the ordinary course of events. You can get it as low as 10,000 Rand, 5,000 Rand, even in exceptional circumstances for zero. Obviously, this is based on the premise that you'll get financed for the balance. Now, affordable housing developers that I'm aware of and ourselves, we usually have in-house bond originators. So they help you negotiate your finance, reduce fees, etc., and find you the best solution. Then legal fees. What are the legal fees applicable to the purchase of an off-plan unit in the development? Their bond costs if you're going to register a bond, and their transfer costs. Not transfer duty, as we know. Buying from a developer, you don't pay transfer duty, and I think the dispensation's gone up to 1 million Rand regardless as well. So usually developers negotiate significant discounts of those bond costs and transfer costs from their conveyancing attorneys, 30% to 50%. So on that example I gave you, for R1 million property, the usual cost might be as high as 50,000 Rand. You can reduce them to 25,000 Rand. Ideally, when you're negotiating a finance, those costs are also capitalized or included in your loan. So therefore, no out-of-pocket costs. So in the scenario I've given you, you've paid 10,000 Rand and you now own a home for R1 million or an investment property. Rent-to-own schemes. Rent-to-own schemes is pretty unusual, but looked at more and more. In those schemes, there are no upfront costs whatsoever. The rental takes a form of installment, and the developer and the funder effectively becomes your bank. However, the downside of that is the interest rates are quite high. Then we get onto operational costs. So now you bought your unit, your own unit. What are your operational costs? So your lights, water, your sewer, your levies to your body corporate. The reason why, and we're punting Green Edge a little bit, why we certify units is because it requires the implementation of energy efficient solutions. In other words, products that reduce those utility costs, lights and water, etc. Ultimately, the aim of every developer in this country is to get off grid entirely from a utilities perspective. I think we know the rationale behind that, Eskom increasing, rolling, etc. So the technology from in affordable housing is not quite there from a cost perspective. You know, to say to someone buying into affordable space, you've got a 7-year payback, but it's going to cost you an extra 80 grand. That's generally not going to fly in this space, not in this market. However, some of the efficiencies that are working and we're implementing are centralized hot water systems. They're verifiably reducing your hot water bill by 80% per month. Smart metering, very important from a management perspective. And also you can verify your usage and your consumption, and you can change your patterns. Solar supplement. Again, the solar industry is a massive but it's going to justify using affordable space. Efficient lightings, your bulbs, low flow taps, etc. Rainwater harvesting, something's looked at again at this stage in affordable stage, not working financially, but always looking at the ever increasing technology. It's getting better and better, and we're always looking at it. Then you mentioned levy stabilization funds. Generally, we don't implement those in affordable space. You know, you've got a new build, it's under warranty for a certain amount of time, and we should be able to, as long as your body corporate is strong and regulates your reserves, you'll be okay.
Perfect, thanks, Chris.
Okay.
So Neil, just a question for you. I think what I find really, really interesting is that last year in 2019, FNB reported that their home loan approval rate was 91.2%, which is obviously remarkably high, probably the highest it's ever been. And that was 28% higher than what it was in 2016. I think the question I have is, do you think banks will be under more pressure currently post-lockdown to really lend more and help stimulate the market? And what are your thoughts on the market going forward? Neil, you just
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me now? Okay, good stuff. Sorry, I forgot to unmute, guys. So maybe I'll just give a little bit of background before I actually answer the question. You know, from a real estate investor, where I started as an investor myself, and I've actually today we're sitting with COVID-19. I've been through probably 3 different market crashes. I don't know if anybody remembers 1997, interest rates at 25.5%. Today, 7.75%. People were running from the hills from real estate in 97, 98, and they didn't want to touch it. In fact, everybody was selling. All the corporates who were the old mutuals, the Sunlands, the Liberties, used to own all the bigger buildings, and they sold off all their portfolios en masse. We then, of course, had the 2008 crash, and then now, of course, we're sitting with COVID-19. And if we look at some of the fundamentals of, you know, between sort of COVID-19 versus, we see that today we're sitting with much higher debt, national debt. We're also sitting with lower interest rates compared to 2008, not higher. And unemployment is a lot higher as well. So those are just the sort of the market drivers of the fundamentals. In terms of the banks, I think what the banks have really got right is the pre-approvals of bonds, and I think they've managed to fast track that. And I think it's also got to do with people realizing that they're not going to qualify based on the submissions that either got poor credit or whatever it may be. So I think there's a couple of things that have happened. I think the banks have got smarter in terms of their processing, in terms of being under pressure. I think at the moment banks are under pressure because we're seeing people can't even afford to pay rent today. And I don't want to be sort of an explorer of doom and gloom. I just want to be realistic. The figure I heard yesterday from TPN is that currently the defaults on people that own rental properties is almost 30% in the residential sector, which is extremely high. And so that's something that we've just got to kind of put into perspective, you know, if you're an investor or a purchaser of property. And obviously COVID-19 is an unusual event. It's not a normal event. And certainly for the next 6 months or 3 to 6 months, I mean, banks are going to be under pressure to survive. I mean, every single bank has offered a 3-month payment holiday to those people that are in distress, for those that have actually applied. And of course, last night we also had an attorney on one of the panels, and he's saying, oh, I mean, this is not the time to start suing everybody, getting people to pay rent, because everybody's sitting in the same situation. This is a very unique situation that we're sitting into. Banks have offered a payment holiday. Renters have got to be, and landlords have got to be a little bit more patient. Now, if you look at the commercial sector, it's almost 50% default. So really what I'm saying is, in terms of going forward, I think the banks will definitely have to open up the taps without a doubt. I mean, I recall as a private investor in 2001, 2002, when the market turned around, we had the biggest property boom up until 2007, just prior to 2008, when we had the global financial crisis. And of course, I mean, I bought 22 properties from a direct developer directly at a 5,000 Rand deposit, and I had 4 bonds with 4 banks. I had 22 bonds, and I believe that in 18 months' time we could be sitting in that scenario again. And it's really, and I've been speaking to quite a few number of the banks. I've been in touch with them of recent times. And I believe that it's not going to be immediate. We are in for still some really troubled times. I think things are going to get worse before they're going to get better. So don't expect it overnight. I think we're also going to see prices of real estate. There's going to be a flurry of real estate coming onto the market because there's a lot of distressed investors who are sitting there with tenants that can't pay their rent, and they want to sell. So the immediate thing is selling. So there could be an initial flurry. But to answer your question, I think the banks will be back, and I think we're hoping that they're going to open up the taps, and I think they're going to look at stimulating the market once again. I think we could get back into 2001, 2002 again, maybe in about 18 months' time. So I think sort of last quarter of 2021 and 2022 could be the start of a new property boom, in my opinion.
And noted, thanks, Neil. And I know there are some questions, or quite a lot of questions coming through. So just to let all of you know that we are noting those questions, and we'll definitely get to those towards the end of the session, so those aren't lost. Neil, just quickly, one more question. So obviously you mentioned the interest rates. The interest rates are the lowest they've been in 47 years. I don't know if anyone knows that. The prime lending rate currently is at 7.75%. Just financially, what impact does that have monthly for someone who's lending from a bank, the interest rates having come down as much as they have in the last couple of months?
Not huge. So, I mean, if you just take a 500,000 Rand loan from the bank, I mean, and you look at, there's already been a 2.25% drop since January. So we were sitting at 10% before. And that saving is equivalent to, I think it's, normally the bond payment would have been 4,825. It's now 4,100. That's already a saving of 725 rands. That's massive. And I still believe there's still going to be more stimulus. There's going to be more drops. I don't think by a percentage. I think there'll be a 0.25 or possibly a 0.5. I think it's still coming. And remember, as I mentioned, you know, COVID-19 is an unusual situation. So it's very different. I mean, this is comparable to Spanish flu in 1913, and some people are even comparing it to the Great Depression, which was in I think it was somewhere around 2019, somewhere around there, and even Weimar Republic, where they printed cash. Unfortunately, in South Africa, we don't print money like they do in the United States to stimulate markets, and in the UK, for example. So I think that's a good thing. So I really think with all the stimulus, I mean, I saw today that our finance minister, Tito Mboweni, he's actually applied to the IMF for funding, and so that would mean that funding has to be very controlled and directed in a certain direction to stimulate this economy. I think that's positive. I think that's extremely positive, and I think that's going to be part of the stimulus that is going to drive this economy up again, because we were already in junk status. We were in a really poor state from the last 10 years of mismanagement of the economy. And I think COVID-19, we're probably going to we've dodged the bullet, to be quite honest. We could have crashed and burned as a country alone. And believe this now, this is an international problem. This is a global pandemic. This is not a South African problem. It's a global pandemic. And I think we can get out of this so much stronger.
Thanks, Neil. Couldn't agree more. So I think, Rian, over to you. I think there are a lot of people in this chat who might not necessarily understand what this inner city rejuvenation is all about. And I know you guys are obviously the drivers behind Jewel City, which is a 1.2 billion Rand inner city precinct next to Maboneng and Joburg. So I think maybe if you just give the guys a bit more insight into what is this inner city rejuvenation and what drives that segment of the markets.
Thanks, Stefan, and welcome to all the listeners. Yeah, so we've been in the rental industry, and specifically in the inner city of Johannesburg, for the past 20 years. And what we've realized over time is that, and it's all been stepping stones for us, that we've moved our business, and our business has evolved over time to start focusing on precincts. What we're doing now with Jewel City, as you're mentioning, Stefan, is we acquired 6 city blocks from Redefine, and we're transforming that into the best analogy for me is it's an affordable Melrose Arch scheme that's going to consist of almost 1,200 entry-level residential rental apartments, plus offices, plus a gym, plus retail, ShopRites, banks, school. We've got Kiro that moved into the city. We're very excited about that. Your McDonald's, your Chicken Lickens, and all the amenities that typically not there in any other inner city rental developments. So we've changed our philosophy where our focus is that we want to give a tenant that wants to come and stay with us the ability to walk out into a managed precinct where you could typically work, you could shop, your school can go to kids, etc. We're also focusing a lot on amenities for the tenants because it's similar to the other developers on the panel. If you're a tenant or a homeowner and you're staying in a small confined space, it's important that when you develop these schemes, you think of all the additional amenities, the play areas, the braai areas, places of interactions because of those small confined spaces. So that's taking a big focus of us. Other than that, we're also busy with a big scheme called Absa Towers Main that we're converting into 500 affordable rental apartments with Absa leasing back the first 8 floors from us. And our focus going forward will be to build onto these precincts and to acquire or create new precincts in other metropolitans of South Africa. We are just as excited as everybody, and we believe in the affordable rental housing market because in the context of South Africa, we've always had a housing challenge. And even though with the impact of COVID that we're currently experiencing, and as Neil said, there is definitely an increase in non-payers in the rental market, we believe that this market is very well cushioned and would probably be the market that will have the first positive effect post-COVID because people will migrate down from your higher LSMs into this market. And we believe that the buy-to-let market will maintain and also the rental market for those buy-to-let investors is a good and sustainable market in the context of South Africa and post-COVID.
Thanks, Rian. So I know that your portfolio is heavily a rental-based portfolio, but we also obviously know that at the beginning of the year in the budget speech, government announced that no transfer duties would apply to properties under $1 million. Obviously, that doesn't have any impact on guys who are buying off-plan, but another government subsidy to help support first-time buyers is FLISP. And those of you who don't know what FLISP means, it's a finance-linked investment subsidy program. I know Sims Naika from FLISP is actually on the chat at the moment. But can you just maybe give us a bit more insight into what FLISP is?
Yes, as you rightly say, we're not an expert. I'm not an expert in that sector, but I can tell you what my understanding about it is. It's a subsidy program that subsidizes first-time home owners that's too rich to qualify for your typical RDP houses and just not at a stage where they can afford to buy their first properties. So I think currently those subsidies has got an upper age limit of about 120,000 Rand for the lowest income range of about 3,500 Rand a month household income. And I think the subsidy also, it's limited on household income of the prospective buyer. And I think the upper limit under correction is 22,000 Rand a month household income. But there's a very nice link that I'm going to share with you that you could post to all the listeners afterwards if they want to do some further reading on it. But in short, it's a subsidy to assist buyers that can't afford for that barrier of entry to pay the deposit to assist them in acquiring the first property.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think just to add to that, so it's for those of you who don't know, FLISP, it ranges from people with income bracket of 3.5 grand to 22,000 Rand a month in terms of combined household income. The subsidies range from between 27,000 and 121,000, and it's all linked to the bond repayments that the person secures. So it has to be linked to a bond, but it's a really, really useful for people who fall into that household income and a really, really good initiative. It was actually the household income was raised from 15 to 22,000 in 2018. So it's really something worthwhile for a lot of people to know about. So, Chris, I'm just going to jump back or go back to you on this one. And I think, so you and Graham are both involved in a project in Ballito called Ballito Groves. So and again, we're talking about the growth of this particular market. So that particular project sold 190 units in 28 days, which was a record for Ballito. And I think the question for me is how much of that is related to, in this segment of the market, related to product and price, or how much of it is related to location?
I see the online poll. You just did an online poll, and I see obviously got some knowledgeable people that are listening in. And I think it was 60% agreed that location was the most important. So, but all three are important. The principle of affordable housing investment is called GASH investing, good area, small home, in infill areas. In other words, in already in established areas, we're not reinventing the wheel. The infrastructure is there, the development, the roads, the schools, the hospitals, the industry is there. What does a good location mean? A good location means it gives you better value than not a good location. I don't want to give comparisons, but you've used Ballito versus some other area. Take that same project, same unit, same property, put it in another area, would you achieve the same price? Two forms of location. There's a macro location, obviously, which is the town or city area, and there's a site-specific location. Before purchasing a piece of land or a development site, we do a comprehensive market research. In other words, we look at the actual fact. So again, going to Ballito Groves, we had a perception. Everyone's moving there, industry moving there, schools, shops, etc., moving there. The comprehensive market research, and I'll give Rainmaker a punch here, which Rainmaker do, verifies what the demand is for areas. It verifies who's developing there, what the comparatives are, why you should be investing there. So then you've got, so that process then obviously shows that the population are moving there and they're driving the demand. It also shows you what price you should be selling at and what your product should be. Then your site specific, this most important thing from your site location is its convenience. Ideally within walking distance of the major industries, shops, etc., close to transport, and yeah, all within a couple of kilometers thereof. So if you want me to go to price, to talk about price, price is also particularly important. If the thing is priced correctly based on your market research, based on your competitors, based on your comparables, it will sell well. You've also got to show to your investors who are buying in a good yield. Generally in affordable housing, you're at the low end of the rate scale. Your economies of scale means that your levies are low, and if you can substantiate good rental demand through that research process, then you can give your good yields. Now, this sector gives the best yields in the residential sector, and that talks to the amount of residential funds with the underlying assets being affordable housing in this space. Again, with prime at 7.75, if you can show your investor a net yield of 10, obviously forecast, you've got something, a positive thing from a price thing to sell. Again, its location will then speak to the ability to have capital growth of that investment as well. Your product, it has to be solid. You know, these units are small, but it has to be finished well. Solid, so not cheap. Energy efficient solutions, baths we find quite important in an affordable space, which is unusual. But remember, where's your child going to bath? Things like a prepaid metering, smart metering, etc. Also very important. Then obviously your amenities outside of your unit, good security, nice amenities, practical stuff that you'll buy.
Chris?
And then last, the reputable corporates who manage investment. Yeah.
Yeah, we just lost you for a sec there. I'm just going to, while your connection's there, I'm just going to move on to one of the questions. So, and guys, excuse us, we don't get through all the questions, but there are some really, really relevant ones. So Graham, I want to just push this question onto you. So this is from Yohanda Toy, and it's a very relevant question. It says, why would someone as an investor buy in an estate? The rental's never high enough to cover your bond, ? The tenant wins all the way in a new development, or how would you say to look at these developments from an investment perspective? I think very good question. I think, Graham, is that true? Graham, are you there?
No, he's gone.
Okay. Rian, I don't know.
Take it. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're happy to take it, Chris.
So just quickly recap. It was.
So I think the question was just why would you buy into an estate as an investor? And the question was, is the rental ever high enough to cover your bond?
Well, I think I touched on it. I think probably that's where you may have left me, especially now with prime at 7.75%. And I think your yields on the bulk of the affordable things are sometimes double digits. Okay. Your barrier to entry is your 5 or 10,000 Rand deposit. And if your yield after obviously you're 5%, your shortfalls are low. You know, so there's a real benefit from a return on equity perspective.
Okay, perfect. Graham, are you still with us? Okay, so Georgina, just a question from Rala Schaffer. It says, hi Georgina, how do you motivate the costs that have been associated to being certified? In the case where the developer disposes of the property at the end and thus does not get the operational cost benefit. Market is not pricing this in at the moment. I don't know if that question makes sense.
No, it doesn't, and we get asked that question a lot. So yes, so there are certain costs associated with certification and with the professional fees that you would use for an edge expert or an edge auditor. And then also one has to think about potential costs associated maybe with some of the measures that you're going to do to make your development more sustainable. And that depends on, you know, what it is that you're comparing it against. So there you would look at, you know, pricing it inappropriately. And then we have global evidence, and we have seen it in some South African instances where that results or translates into a high resale value or an improved asset value. And that's essentially how the landlord would recoup some of those costs. However, also keep in mind that the costs associated with green are not as large as what one would assume. We've done a lot of research in the commercial sector. We've actually done quite groundbreaking research looking at the commercial sector. And, you know, we found that on average, the cost of going green in terms of a capex cost was in the range of about 3.8%, but I mean, it could be as low as 1%. When we looked at kind of return on investment and looked at operational costs along with NSCI, it was quite clear that green offices were definitely delivering solid returns in quite a tough market and also had lower vacancy rates. And, you know, anecdotally, we're getting similar stories from residential developments as well. Thank you.
Perfect. So just, Neil, a question for you. This is from Ryan Hunt. And it says, Neil, you refer to a 30% residential drop-off. How does it compare to the commercial or retail sector? I don't know if you can just touch on that quickly.
Yeah, actually, I think I did mention it earlier, but yeah, currently in this month, remember we're only in month 1 of COVID-19, and remember there's some people that might not go back to work, and obviously those people in the residential sector, they obviously for the next week they cannot be evicted from the property, certainly not until you know, after lockdown is lifted. So, you know, I think Rian mentioned a little bit earlier about tenants that they need, new tenants that they need from essential services that to move in. So I see for next month, I see residential dropping off even more than 30%. At the moment, the number for commercial is 49.5, and I think it's moving down, and we've seen a lot of resistance from a lot of commercial tenants not to pay rent. Even those that are open, I think that you've probably seen some of the stuff about in the news about Dis-Chem not wanting to pay their full rent, even though they're operational, they're open, they're essential service. And so yeah, look, everybody's really feeling the pinch, and I think this will be a temporary scenario until the economy reopens, and I think it's just an complete abnormal situation. I don't think that must deter anybody for the future investment. It doesn't mean that real estate is a bad investment. It just is not a good time. Obviously, for people that are owners, that are multiple owners. My good friend from Financial Mail magazine who passed away, Ian Fife, he also managed to time the market. He was also a sideline investor as well. And he offloaded 300 properties 2 weeks before the global financial crisis kicked in. And I mean, that's timing to perfection for an investor. I've been following Robert Kiyosaki. I've interviewed him about 8 times already. I know him quite well. He's been calling a market crash for a long time. Here it is. Welcome. Thank you very much. And I've offloaded properties 8 months ago already. So you've got to kind of read, but I'll be back. And I can tell you what, there's going to be the biggest bargain hunting opportunities coming forward for real estate. I mean, Rian's product is massive demand. So with Chris, the entry-level market is the place where it's going to happen, guys. There's such a demand. We need to house our people. And I just think we're going to have our lowest interest rates ever. It's just going to be the affordability. There's going to be 100% bonds, and that's going to kick in as well. So I believe that the banks will, after this whole COVID-19, they're going to open up the taps, and real estate is going to, and specifically residential. And I think, Rian, you mentioned earlier on about taking over Growth Point properties. I mean, they own a lot of commercial office blocks, which are seeing, I mean, in some areas in Sandton, I think it's close to 20% vacancies and that kind of stuff. In the CBD of Cape Town, 10%. So to really answer the question, I think, yes, it's high at the moment. It probably could get worse. So expect it to get worse before it gets better. That's I always say, plan for the worst outcome, expect the best outcome, but, prepare for surprise. And this whole thing with everybody losing their job, we're going to have more entrepreneurs, and you're probably going to be happy you don't have to report to a boss. So there's a lot of positivities of that. Just get yourself a laptop and become active online. So yeah, so I think those are the stats, and it's not nice reading, but I think, I don't think it's the end. I think it's really a market turning around, and it's resetting itself. And it is time for us to reset, retool, and refocus ourselves in the market. And this is the time to learn and educate as much as you can possibly about what's happening and responding to it in that way.
Thanks, Neil. So I think there obviously are a lot of questions that have come through. And I think what we're going to do is we've always wanted to keep the session between 45 minutes and an hour. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting answers from the different panel members, and we're going to be posting those answers to questions that haven't necessarily been addressed within the chat, and we're going to be posting them onto the Rainmaker Marketing blog on our website, and we'll obviously communicate with all of you post the webinar, and we will post the video with comments. I think there was just one question here. It came from Dave Kirk when you said, what do you think the property market will crash by? I think just to really emphasize from our side that although it's a very, very challenging time, there are so many positives within the market in terms of things like interest rates and certain segments of the market that continue to perform really well. And I think, I would be very hesitant to talk about the word crash when I think there are opportunities out there. And I think it's really us zoning in on those opportunities that we think will grow or will appreciate, and the ones that are really unique. So I'd like to just thank the panel. I don't know if there are any questions or any final comments from any of the panel members that you guys want to leave as a parting shot.
I've got a comment. If there's anyone from the Department of Education watching, the kids need to go back to school immediately. Tomorrow. I'm serious. Take all those empty beds in the hospitals, put them in the schools, and they can experience boarding school. Thank you.
And maybe I think, Graham, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm back.
I think maybe just very quickly, I think in terms of construction, when do you think construction will be back on?
Look, currently we're hoping for it to come back under stage 3, but if we can push, there's a big push from residential developers, and a letter was sent out. Well, has got enough social distancing, and we can manage all of that. So it's incumbent on us to try and get back on site earlier. We need to save sales and get people into units. That's me.
Perfect, thanks. And I know one of the positives was the guys spoke earlier before the panel started about the deeds office opening next week, which I think is really positive. It really gets momentum back into the property market, gets people transferring, gets buyers into transfer positions, and helps the market as a whole. So I think those are two really key points, and we look forward to all of that happening. So again, any other comments from the panel, guys?
I just think everybody must just reset themselves, refocus, and don't, a lot of people might be in a negative mindset. And I think, this thing will pass. And I think that's the most important you've got to realize. It's not going to be here forever. We just got to be able to see ourselves through this particular period. But use the opportunity of being at home. I mean, come on to these webinars instead of watching BoobTube and all that other kind of stuff which you're watching.
What's that?
No, I'm talking about TV, not the kind of stuff you're talking about. But I think really, I think people need to use this opportunity to educate yourself, to learn as much as possible, to reconnect with people and with partners out there, and use this downtime. I've never been busier in all my life, on Zoom calls, and probably 5, 6, 7 a day. Use that opportunity to reconnect, rebuild, sort of going forward. And so I'm talking about sort of Netflix and Game of Thrones and that kind of stuff versus, rather get onto a webinar and learn something and educate yourself going forward. I think that's really what I'm trying to say, and use this opportunity wisely. Because once you get out of it, you can be ready, to grab on every single opportunity. And let me tell you what, this market is going to come back in such a way. You just got to jump in at the right time. So that's my bit, Stefan.
Perfect, thanks, Neil.
Lastly from me, and I just want to, as a closing thought, is I think for all these buy-to-let investors and landlords with residential tenants, I think it's important, and we've learned, is speak to your tenants, try and accommodate them, try and understand their personal circumstances, try and group them into groupings where guys are temporarily affected versus permanent affected. And the guys that are permanent affected, I think there's an opportunity for the landlord and the tenant to work on some sort of arrangement to retain the tenant. But because we all know that there's a cost in placing a new tenant within a unit. And as far as possible, we want to try and rehabilitate and retain tenants to the extent that we can. Unfortunately, there is going to be a lot of economic hardship, and there's people that's going to be permanently affected. And those tenants, unfortunately, one would need to recycle within the portfolios. But my last word of advice is ask your tenants to communicate with the landlords, and don't just give them notice, and try and assist where possible.
Perfect, thanks, Rian. So again, I think just, yeah, sure, Georgina.
No, just a last note to say thanks. And I think just as a closing thought, COVID's really taught us that we can do things differently. I'm not saying that it has to be, in these conditions permanently going forward, but I mean, we're aware of doing things in a different way now. And I think that we should just apply that going forward. And anybody who needs kind of any advice on going green, the GBCSA is a not-for-profit. We are here to help you start that journey. So just give us a shot.
Yeah, and I think just a big thanks to everything you guys are doing for the industry and how you really are transforming what's happening in that space. So again, thanks to everyone for listening. We're going to be keeping the same slot every week. Tuesday at 12 o'clock, we'll be announcing the topic for next week. And again, the whole perspective is to give insights that aren't really available and to involve panelists of the caliber of what we had today. So obviously we're going to post all of the answers to questions plus the live video on our website. But thanks again to all of you for joining, and have a great week and stay safe. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Yes. Bye.
Bye.